Welcome to this press conference after the informal Ministers for Home Affairs meeting that took place here in Logroño. The Minister for Home Affairs will take the floor first, and then the Commissioner Ylva Johansson will take the floor. And we will have a series of questions and answers after the presentations. So could you please give us your name and media if you wish to take the floor to raise questions? So the Minister is the Minister of Home Affairs, and he will deal with questions that have to do with domestic issues. I'd like to give the floor now to the Minister for Home Affairs. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for attending this press conference. It's a great pleasure to have hosted my colleagues and Commissioner, my dear Ylva, in this beautiful city of Logroño. I'm sure they are all enjoying the friendly personality of this region of Spain. Como saben, los encuentros.
As you know, informal ministerial meetings of the European Union are very important meetings because they allow us to think about and debate the proposals and objectives that we will be dealing with during the next months and during the Spanish presidency. But this meeting is even more special because we are getting close to the legislative term, and we have some key files that we would like wrap up for the development of the EU, more specifically migration policy in this context. There was a council decision on the 8th of June in Luxembourg on the regulations for management and procedures. That's very good progress, but we still have a lot of work to do, and it's in the spirit of compromise and dialogue that we have worked here in Logroño. We want to come down the home straights in a calm way. We don't want to be precipitous or work too hastily given the tight timetable, but we can't waste any time. We need to give a satisfactory response to a challenge which is incredibly important for the future of the Union. It's very important to renew this migration pact, and this is one of our major challenges which will depend on the flexibility and generosity of all. We talked also about the crisis regulation that we need in order to face extraordinary circumstances that we hadn't known in the European Union some years ago, but we do know now that they can affect any member state. The exchange of opinions and views has been very useful. We can see that this regulation will be very important when coming down the home straights of the Migration and Asylum Pact, and we have to respect fundamental rights in this area. This area is of ever more importance, and it's very important to anticipate crises, and we need to have cooperation and trust with origin and transit countries. Ukraine was another priority issue dealt with today. The morning meeting was a very good opportunity to move forward in common measures to support the government and the people of Ukraine. The European Union has shown shown from the outset that we will support unwaveringly Ukraine, and that will continue to be the case. The president of the government, Pedro Sanchez, as president of the Council of the European Union, expressed this categorically during the first day of our presidency, and he did that from Kiev. And we will take the time necessary. We are not going to flinch in our efforts. We talked about the impact of organized crime on our societies and gave special attention to illicit drug trafficking. This is one of the major and most dangerous challenges that we face, also because they infiltrate socioeconomic structures and also the attendant violence that comes with that trafficking. We have to act in this area, and we have to deal with the money flows. We have to follow the money, and we all agree that there's an importance to be given to training and specialization of our police forces. These are very intertwined with the use of technology and innovation in police work. We are fighting relentlessly, and all member states are working on this at the highest level, collaborating and working together. But this is not something that is only something we deal with at the EU. It also goes beyond our borders. We have agreements with our partners to deal with a key area, which is Latin America. We want to provide impetus for our relationships with Latin America through the CLASI. There will be a meeting on the 28th of September in Brussels, and we will be adopting a joint Latin America-EU declaration at that time. This transatlantic alliance will strengthen both continents and will provide mutual benefits and will allow us to better combat organized crime. Also, I would like to talk about the debate that we had on security in the digital space and police investigation in this area. The Swedish presidency provided impetus for this, and they set up a high-level group for access to data. This is an initiative that we will continue during the Spanish presidency. If we don't have adequate legislation that allows police forces to access the necessary data for investigations, police work and judicial work will fail. Member states and associates, the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the competent agencies have expressed their points of view, and the aim is to, as soon as possible, reach a balanced legislative framework that respects fundamental rights, the principles and values of the European Union, without giving up anything up in terms of citizen security. Citizens must feel protected in the real world as well as in the digital world. There's a lot at stake. We need to make sure that the police and the judiciary is effective in terms of combating, for example, child sexual exploitation and protecting the most vulnerable. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Commissioner Johansson.
Thank you very much. Can I start by congratulating you, dear Fernando, and your team to a very successful start of the Spanish presidency in the area of home affairs, and for bringing us here to Locarno, sorry, because I think we all really appreciate and to be in this beautiful region of Rioja, and for your hospitality. And can I also say that you mentioned that we are in the end of the legislative mandate, and this is, of course, a very crucial presidency now, the Spanish presidency. And I must say it's a privilege to work with such an experienced and excellent leader as you are shown to be in the Council of Ministers of Interior. We have seen that in many difficult negotiations that we had, not at least the one we had in June with the breakthrough on important files on the pact, and we can feel it in the room, the respect that all ministers send to you in your role as a leader. So I think it's going to be a great presidency. What we discussed today, as you mentioned, we started with a very important fight against organized crime and the link with trafficking in drugs. This is a fight that we are not winning right now. We have to be clear on that. We are stepping up, we are doing more and more, but so are the organized criminal groups. They are being more and more professional, more and more international, and more violent. And they are very successful in trafficking drugs into the European Union, even though we are seizing more and more. The link with Latin America is crucial here. We had the Latin America Summit earlier this week, and I think the conclusions from the statement there also show that they are all on the leaders level see that we need to do more when it comes to fighting the criminal groups and the drugs trafficking. I was recently in Colombia and Ecuador, and I'm very much welcome that you will invite the ministers of interior from Latin America to a joint meeting in September, because it's clear that we need this cooperation across the Atlantic, police cooperation, but also other cooperation. It takes a network to fight a network. We also had a very good discussion over lunch on the police cooperation in the digital age. And I think this was a very interesting discussion. There was more or less consensus in the room on the need to step up the tools for law enforcement on the online world. And I think that I can conclude it a bit by saying that there is a consensus saying that law enforcement should have equal rights when it comes to the online world, if you compare to the offline world, because otherwise we're going to be without tools when crimes move more and more online, and they do. We also discussed one specific online crime, and that is the child sexual abuse, which unfortunately is growing in a very terrible way. So many children, maybe one child out of 5, is victim of child sexual abuse. We can see it, we know about it because the internet companies are detecting the communication, and they find these films, grooming activities, and pictures. Last year, we received 5.2 million pictures, videos, and grooming activities reported by the internet companies to the European Union. And that is the most common way for the police to start an investigation. And that when they start the investigation, they unfortunately very often find small children, babies and toddlers that are victims of terrible sexual violence. And it's our obligation to stop this. And we are in a crucial moment because we need to adopt the proposal I put on the table. Otherwise, all the reporting of the internet companies will stop. And then we will go blind, and police can't start investigations. So this will be also under your presidency that we need to finalize this. Lastly, we also discussed migration. And this was done in a very constructive and very sober way. All ministers were very interested in finding conclusions and to also find the common approach, the general approach on the only file out of the 11 where we still need the Council to find its position to start the institutional negotiations in the trialogues. So this is so-called crisis proposal, and that was a very promising discussion that we have today, and I will do everything to support you in finding a conclusion on that as soon as possible. Last, I would like to mention Ukraine. This is one of the biggest refugee crises that we are managing. And we are managing in a way that is much better than I think anybody could have thought of before the war started. We are hosting right now more than 4 million Ukrainians in the European Union. And of course there are challenges, but I must say I really praised and thanked all the member states for their efforts, because it's really impressive how much they have been doing, how many children that now go to European schools, EU schools in member states, how many Ukrainians that are now already working in the EU labor market. market. And I told the ministers today, and I will announce it to you, that I will propose to prolong the temporary protection directive until March 2025. And I hope that this proposal can be sent to the Council already in September, so that we will have the proper planning for the refugees, but also for the member states to be able to continue with their strong support for the Ukrainians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we can have some questions and answers. Please introduce yourselves with your name and the name of the media organization you're representing. I'd like to ask you both whether Hungary and Poland had the same reticence today as they had regarding the agreement on June the 8th. Then I wanted to ask about whether the Commissioner is concerned about the short-term future of the regulation, where there will then be some countries where the far right is in power and where they're against migration. Thank you.
You want to First, Hungary and Poland was on the same position as they were when they had their conclusions and a very solid majority in the June Council. So there was no new positions on that. I'm not really sure if I understand your question right, but after 7, 8 years, when migration has been totally blocked in Council, where we have not been able to come forward with new legislative decisions to have a proper European legislative framework, I must say that we are in a better position than we've been for many, many, many years. We have rebuilt trust between member states. We are working close together. We are managing 4 million Ukrainian refugees. We are managing instrumentalization from Lukashenko. We have been managing increasing flows on the Western Balkans that are now going down. We have been together managing when we had this crisis on the Canary Islands by reaching out to third countries, by working together with between the member states and the Commission and our agencies. So the cooperation spirit is better than it ever has been, and I'm convinced that we will reach a final decision on all the legislative files in the pact, and of course then we will have the proper legal framework, and all member states are obliged to comply with the EU legal framework.
Simplemente confirmar.
Yes, I'd just like to confirm, as the Commissioner said, that there were no changes in the positions of Hungary and Poland, and the differences are ones in terms of how they see the principles of responsibility and solidarity. Basically, those are the differences.
Microphone, please. Microphone, please. I would just like to ask you on that second question, are you concerned as the Commissioner that in the immediate future, when there are governments who have ultra-right governments and they have different ideas on migration, is this something that could jeopardize the framework that you're trying to negotiate? And are you concerned in terms of the rise of this type of government?
I think it's always concerning when you see extremist positions, especially if migration is used in a way to threaten citizens of the situation, because migration is manageable and we have shown that it's possible to manage migration, and I think it's important to continue along that. But having said that, the role of the Commission is of course to work with the governments that are elected in our member states, and we do so quite successfully, I must say.
Hola, buenas tardes. Cadena Al Jazeera, quería...
From Al Jazeera. I'd like to ask both of you with regard to the issue of migration. It seems like there's unanimity on the need to collaborate with third countries, but the question is, above and beyond political, financial, economic assistance, are you going to require that those third countries have some type of minimum democracy because there's been a lot about racism and mistreatment of migrants?
Well, fundamental rights is always a core issue for the EU in all international cooperation. We have a lot of these agreements, we have a lot of these processes and dialogues ongoing. It's not related to migration, but it's the overall external action service engagement with third countries. So, of course, this is always important. When it comes to migration, it's important that we also support and make sure that we can help member states and that we can help migrants. So just to give you one example, we are aware that there are migrants in the desert close to the borders in Algeria and Libya, in Tunisia. That's why we gonna now sign in a few days a contract with UNHCR that together with the Red Crescent in Tunisia will support these migrants. We are also working to support third country nationals in Tunisia that would like to voluntarily go back to the country of origin, and also with the reintegration. We are ready to support, to set up proper systems when it comes to identification and registration. So, of course, it's always that what matters the most are always people's lives. Saving life is our first priority. Helping people and preserving dignity and fundamental rights is, of course, always important. That is our core values, and that is not only relevant in the area of migration, it's relevant in all areas that we deal with as a European Union.
Confirmar lo mismo que ha dicho.
Yes, I would confirm what the Commissioner said. Fundamental rights are the basic pillar of any tool that we have to cooperate in the European Union, and our cooperation with North African countries, which are countries of origin and transit, is, as the Commissioner has indicated, are a way then of combating these mafias who put people's lives at risk. They then put people in these inhumane situations, and that's something that the Commissioner has outlined. People then end up in the desert in a very complicated situation and at the mercy of these mafias. We therefore want to cooperate and help those people, of course.
Sagrario.
Soy Sagrario Ortega de la Agencia EFE.
I would just like to ask the Commissioner with regard to the proposal on regulating the combat against child sexual abuse on the Internet. What can the EU do, and what was the basic thinking among the ministers on this?
So we didn't have a specific discussion on the legislation, but these negotiations are ongoing under the leadership of the Spanish presidency. But the reason for my proposal is that it's only the European Union that can regulate this. Because on the EU level, we have the strongest privacy protection on the online globally. And I'm proud of that. But that means that we also need an EU legislation to make sure that we in an equal way can protect children. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that we today saw the Eurobarometer that has asked 26,000 EU citizens among 27 member states specifically on my proposal. And they were, for example, asked what is most important to protect privacy in your private communication, integrity in your private communication, or to protect children from child sexual abuse. Only 2% out of these thought it was more important to protect the personal privacy in communication. 96% thought it was more important to protect the children, or equal important. I think this shows that there is a huge silent majority that expect us as politicians to protect children better online, and that equally with me have very strong feelings about the fact that so many small children are being victims of sexual violence, sometimes ongoing for years without anybody interacting. We have to step up our efforts.
Laura Kostan, ARD German Television. I have a question to both the Commissioner and the Minister. So this morning you said that the Memorandum of Understanding with Tunisia is going to close some smuggling routes, and it's going to have a big impact to have this kind of partnerships against the network of smugglers. But how do you think you can prevent that the smuggling route will just move to Morocco or Egypt or Libya? And is it really responsible for the EU to have this kind of partnerships with countries like Libya and Morocco, Egypt, where we know that human rights violations against migrants have already taken place in the past? Thank you.
There was many questions. So for the recently signed Memorandum of Understanding with Tunisia, it's a very broad and comprehensive one. It covers a lot of areas. Energy, for example, and a lot of other areas. So I would just focus on the migration part, but it's important to say that it's not only migration, it's a much, much broader, comprehensive agreement for the cooperation between Tunisia and the EU. And we are long-standing strategic partners, the EU and Tunisia, and we will continue to be that, and we will deepen our cooperation because of the challenges also that Tunisia is facing. And in the area of migration, I've been to Tunisia 3 times as Commissioner. I also met with President Said in Brussels. And for a few years ago, the main issue were Tunisians that left, paid the smugglers to go on these dangerous journeys to the European Union. Now Tunisia has become more of a transit country. And that means, of course, that we need to step up the support also in any other areas, as I mentioned earlier. When it comes to the fighting the smugglers, they are very seldom only based in one country. They are very often linked international in different countries. Sometimes they have links in Pakistan and in the different countries along the routes and in the EU. So police cooperation is of the essence, and that's why it's so good that we have now agreed with Tunisia that we will work on starting negotiations on a status agreement with Europol and with Eurojust that will allow us to do joint police investigations to go after the smugglers. That's one example.
Lo que ha dicho.
Well, I would agree with what the Commissioner said. Then human trafficking in migrants is something that's a transnational problem. That's why it's an obvious point that we need to work together with other countries, that these migrants are in different countries, but it's all interconnected. I'd like to make it very clear that, as the Commissioner said, the external dimension in migratory policy is not just limited to security concerns and how we can cooperate to dismantle those networks. But instead, we're taking a holistic approach where we then cooperate more broadly with those countries. As the Commissioner said, I would say that migration isn't a problem. It's a challenge. It's always existed. Fighting illegal migration doesn't run counter, then, to allow people to legally, safely, and migrate in an orderly way. Then when we can when we see the way that the population is growing in Africa, then we'll see that the population of Africa is going to run into the billions by 2050. In Europe, just like in Africa, we will have to cooperate and collaborate to try and avoid this kind of complex situation. We need to cooperate and collaborate on development. That's why when we deal with these countries from an external point of view, we're not just thinking about security, we cooperate with them in a holistic way. Our security concerns are to do with then dismantling these networks, which then are preying on the most vulnerable, migrants who have to leave their countries in order to earn a living. If migrants can earn a living in their own countries, then that means we can also provide legal, safe, and orderly ways for them to migrate.
Any more questions?
Sí, buenos días, Laura.
Yes, Europa Press. On the Migratory Pact, Hungary and Poland, it has been said, have maintained their positions. And I'm just wondering if you need unanimity from all member states in order to adopt the crisis regulation and also to finally adopt the Migration and Asylum Pact. And how can you reconcile these differences?
Well, I don't think that's necessary. As we've said, the differences are still there. Hungary and Poland have the same position that they had on the 8th of June, and those differences are due to a different way in which they appreciate how those principles of solidarity and responsibility related to migratory policy. However, we don't need unanimity. The general approach that we reached in the Council on the 8th of June was then something that could move forward, even though there was this opposition. Then when we vote on this, we will need countries to be in favor who then, with the qualified majority, represent 65% of the population of the European Union. That would be necessary for the regulation.
And can I just add that the pact contains of 11 legislative files. 10 of them, the Council have already reached a general approach with qualified majority. Sometimes there have been different countries that might not support in a specific file. But this is the normal way. It's according to the treaty. That's how we take decisions in the area of migration.
Buenas tardes, Juan José Fernández del periódico de Cataluña. Una pregunta.
Catalunya Press. A question to both the Minister and the Commissioner. If I understand correctly, the crime of child sexual abuse online and its prevalence means that 1 out of 5 children are affected by this. Is that really true in the European Union? And is this figure the same in Spain? And then also the second part of the question, how disloyal are social network and social messaging companies with regard to this issue?
First, this figure of 1 child out of 5 is the estimation from Council of Europe. Of course, nobody knows for sure. Other studies talk about 15%, other studies say 18%. So nobody knows exactly what the figures are. So this 1 out of 5 comes from Council of Europe. But my point is that it's very, very common, more common than most of us would like to realize, how many children actually have this experience. And we have seen other studies. There was a study from a UK university that said that the average time it takes for a groomer to get in contact with a child, to establish a relation, the average time is 8 minutes. And our children are out there all the time, more or less. So I just want to show that this is more common than most of us would like to realize. I think we would like to think that this is a rare but heinous crime, but unfortunately it's a common and heinous crime.
No tenemos.
We don't have any statistics that can help us then see what the impact is of these online abusers on children, but we do have our monitoring network, and they have then been able to dismantle pornography networks, not just at a national level in Spain, but also at a European level in coordination with other organizations. This is a major problem which, as the Commissioner said, is relevant across the board, and it's increasing. That's happening after the pandemic, as all other cyber crimes have increased, then child online sexual abuse has increased as well. This is something that's life-changing. Then children were at home for 24 hours a day during the pandemic, and that is something where they could fall victim to this kind of abuse. Then also the groomers were at home all the time. It's the networks and service providers who then had the information on this. But we are then trying to find the right measures to deal with it.
Now, on the operating countries, are they disloyal vis-à-vis European citizens and vis-à-vis the European Union?
The internet companies.
Yeah.
The internet companies are cooperating very well. That's why we received these 5.2 million videos and grooming activities and pictures last year, because they voluntarily do this detection. And this is based on US legislation that we benefit from. So they report to a UN organization that then give the report to us. We need a proper EU legislation to regulate this, but the willingness from companies to cooperate, I think, also from a business perspective, internet companies don't want their services to be used for this heinous crime. And take, for example, those services that would like to have children, at Roblox, for example, would like to have children using it. And that's why they promise parents that they do the detection to protect their children. But that might be forbidden in the European Union if my legislation is not approved. Then all detection, voluntarily or not, will be forbidden in the European Union, and that will make us a safe haven for the perpetrators, while the detection will continue in US and Australia and many other countries. So it's really important that we don't make ourselves a safe haven for perpetrators that would like to do this heinous crime against children.
Bien, pues si no hay ninguna...
Right then, if there are no further questions, so we can now finalize the press conference. Thank you very much, Ms. Minister. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you all.